We're going to get into a new tune here, and I want to mention before we get started that the previous tunes that you've learned have been basically two-part with an A section and a B section. You could think of it as verse and chorus, or you could think of it as a primary part and a contrasting bridge. This is more or less what we would call a pop song structure, in the sense that it has a distinct verse and chorus, both in the contrast of the second part, but in the way that the energy of that chorus part, the B section, lifts, and that's something that we're going to talk about in the performance. There is also a C bridge, which is a pretty common thing. Not every song needs a bridge, but frequently you get to a point where you've heard the same thing a couple of times and we need to hear something different. I've been talking about repetition and variation from the beginning. So in this case, the bridge provides a new set of chord changes, a break in the energy of the song that we've had, just to change things up a little bit. We'll get to that. But first, I want to talk about the primary rhythm of this tune, which is a syncopated rhythm part. I've defined syncopated as emphasizing offbeats. So keep in mind, this is something you've heard me say before, I'll continue to reinforce it, a steady pulse gives us downbeats. It's when your foot hits the floor. The offbeat is just in between. Your foot lifts off the floor, your hand comes off your knee, the strumming arm comes up instead of down. It's just the opposite of whatever the beat was. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And it really is helpful to think of those offbeats as being in-betweens, because you don't ever want to actually lose your pulse. Here's what the rhythm part sounds like when I play it slowly. This is the primary chord structure for the verse A section. Now, if you're listening to that casually, you might feel like, well, wait a minute, where's the syncopation? Because what I hear you playing is boom, boom, bee-da, boom, bam, bee-da, bee-da. And as far as the movement of my strumming hand, that is true. But the syncopations can be hidden inside even steady running eighth notes, because we can choose to make more out of an offbeat without actually losing the downbeats. So that's what's happening here on the chord change. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Listen to that rhythm again. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2, 3 and 4. So what happens here is that by leaving out the downbeat, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 and 2, that puts an emphasis both on the and of 4 and the subsequent and of 1, and lands us on the backbeat 2 of the second bar. Boo, ba, boo, da, ba, ba, 3, 4, 1. You might hear this kind of chord change referred to as a push. Essentially what we've done is taken a chord that would land on the downbeat and pushed it an eighth note earlier. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, and. Let me just take a moment to talk about these left-hand chords. This is, if I play with 3 fingers, we would call this a G5 technically, because there is no third. I mentioned in an earlier lesson how I will frequently in this voicing leave the third out. There's a couple of reasons why we don't need it. I want the bright chime of those high strings without this note taking up space in the bottom end. So this is really a power chord, paired ring and pinky, strings 1 and 2, and the extension of the middle across. Be aware, this is probably familiar, it's a very common G chord, but be aware of the difference between the curled ring and pinky fingers, bent at all the joints because they don't have much ground to cover, they just need to point back at the guitar neck. But the middle finger needs to extend across the neck, and so it's not nearly as curled. my hand does have to crook a little bit outward because we have 3 fingers lined up on a horizontal or vertical, whatever, however you want to think of it, across the same fret, which is not really the way your hand naturally sits until we rotate out a little. I'm not suggesting this is unnatural. It's within our normal range of motion, which essentially is swinging the entire arm on the pivot of the ball of the thumb. From here, I'm going to a C add 9 chord. This is probably familiar. Some of you may be calling this a C chord. Not quite accurate. Add 9 because of this note. Here's a standard C. Here's a C scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So C chord plus the 9th. Why is it a 9 and not a 2, Dave? Well, because we just counted past 8, and that's the standard. So that's a nice sounding C add 9 chord, but if we're coming from here and we've already got this sound on top, then it sounds really good to keep that. From here, I'm going to an E minor 7th, and you may recognize this form. Ordinarily, you might play it like this, or maybe like this. I prefer this fingering for a standard E minor, honestly. But this frees up ring and pinky to stay over here. So we have this nice smooth change with this added color note, the G, the C add 9, E minor 7 with the 7th here on the 2nd string, and then a D. Add the pushes. As I strum, that rhythm's going to change a little bit because, as I said earlier, I don't want to think in terms of strum patterns. I want to think in terms of a groove, a pocket, what we might call a heartbeat central rhythm, and then variations in how we choose to fill all the space of the 8/8 notes.